Open the trunk, or I'll arrest you." The words cut through the cold Atlanta night before Naomi Brooks could even pull her handbrake all the way up. Red and blue lights washed over the pharmacy parking lot, turning the wet pavement into broken glass, flashing across the back seat where her 9-year-old daughter, Avery, had just lifted her sleepy head from a folded jacket. Naomi kept both hands where the officer could see them, left palm resting on the steering wheel, right hand open beside the gearshift, her breathing slow enough to look calm and tight enough to hurt. Officer Travis Cole stood outside her window with one hand hooked near his belt, his jaw set, his eyes carrying that familiar kind of certainty, the kind that had already decided who she was before asking her name. "Sir," Naomi said quietly, "I gave you my license, registration, and insurance. I'm asking what legal reason you have to search my trunk." Cole leaned closer, his shadow bending across the glass. "Around here, I am the reason." For a second, even the night seemed to stop moving. The pharmacy sign buzzed above them. A paper receipt slid across the asphalt in the wind. Somewhere near the entrance, a man holding a grocery bag slowed down, pulled out his phone, and began recording. Avery's small voice came from the back seat. "Mom." Naomi did not turn around. She could not afford to let fear become the loudest thing in the car. If stories like this remind you why truth still matters, subscribe and stay with us until the end, because what happened in this parking lot did not end with handcuffs, it ended with a $6.7 million lawsuit that shook an entire police department. Naomi swallowed once, feeling the dryness in her throat, then spoke with the careful patience of a woman who had spent years learning that every word could either protect her or be twisted against her. "Officer, I do not consent to a search." Cole's face changed, not dramatically, not like rage in a movie, but in the smaller, colder way power reacts when someone it expects to bend simply stands upright. Behind him, his younger partner, Officer Ryan Miller, shifted near the patrol car. The tiny red light on Miller's body camera blinked steadily, unnoticed by most people, but not by Naomi. She had seen it the moment she pulled over. She had noticed the pharmacy security camera mounted above the automatic doors. She had noticed the gas station camera across the street. Old habits. Legal habits. Survival habits. Years ago, before medical bills swallowed her plans, Naomi had worked as a paralegal in a civil rights firm downtown. She had organized evidence folders, reviewed traffic stop transcripts, listened to frightened mothers describe nights exactly like this one. Back then, she had been behind a desk, highlighting other people's pain in yellow marker. Tonight, she was the file. Cole tapped 2 fingers against the window frame. "Step out of the vehicle." Naomi's stomach tightened. "Am I being detained?" "Step out." "For what reason?" His smile was thin and empty. "Obstruction." Avery sat fully upright now, her braids slightly loose from sleep, her school sweatshirt bunched at the sleeves. "Mommy, what's happening?" Naomi finally looked back, only for half a second, just long enough to give her daughter the kind of look that meant "remember what I taught you. Count slowly. Breathe through your nose. Do not let fear drive." Then she opened the door herself, slowly, with both hands visible. The night air touched her face, damp and metallic, carrying the smell of rain, gasoline, and hot asphalt. Cole stepped back as if she were dangerous, though she moved like someone handling glass. "Turn around," he said. Naomi looked past him at Miller, at the blinking camera, at the watching stranger by the pharmacy door. Then she turned, not because Cole was right, but because Avery was watching. And Naomi Brooks needed her daughter to see the difference between surrender and dignity. Naomi Brooks had learned long ago that fear had a sound. It was not always a scream. Sometimes it was the tiny click of a car door opening under flashing lights. Sometimes it was a child holding her breath in the back seat. Sometimes it was the silence of people watching from 10 feet away, close enough to see, too far away to help. She stood beside her old silver Honda with the pharmacy sign humming above her and the night pressing cold against her uniform jacket. Her name tag still hung crooked on her chest, the blue plastic scratched from years of double shifts and last-minute inventory counts. She had been on her feet since 2 in the afternoon, filling shelves, calming angry customers, counting register drawers, and reminding a new cashier how to handle expired coupons without losing patience. At 10:38, she had clocked out, bought Avery a small carton of chocolate milk, and promised they would be home before 11. At 10:47, red and blue lights had filled her mirrors. That was how fast an ordinary life could be interrupted. Officer Travis Cole stood a few feet away, watching her as though he were waiting for her to make the mistake he had already accused her of making. Naomi kept her shoulders still. She knew how this looked from the outside: a black woman in work shoes, a tired child in the back seat, an officer with a badge, a patrol car blocking the exit. People would say later that she should have just opened the trunk. They would say it was only a trunk. Only a few seconds. Only a search. But Naomi had spent 6 years in a civil rights law office listening to the word only become the doorway to everything worse. Only step over here. Only answer a few questions. Only let us look inside. Only prove you have nothing to hide. She remembered Mr. Harlan, the old attorney who had trained her before his stroke, tapping a finger on a legal pad and saying, "Rights do not disappear because someone says the word cooperate." She had believed him then. She had to believe him now. Avery sniffled from inside the car. Naomi wanted to turn around, open the back door, and wrap her daughter in both arms, but she did not move without permission because every motion felt like it could be renamed as threat. "Officer," she said, her voice low, almost gentle, "my daughter is in the car. Can I call my sister to pick her up?" Cole looked toward Avery, then back at Naomi. "You should have thought about that before you decided to play games." The words landed softly, but they bruised something deeper than skin. Naomi's fingers curled once, then opened. She would not give him anger. She would not give him volume. She would not give him a scene he could write into a report later. Across the lot, the man with the grocery bag was still recording. Near the pharmacy door, a cashier named Lena stood frozen behind the glass, one hand over her mouth. Naomi knew Lena. 21 years old, community college student, nervous laugh, always cold even in July. Naomi had trained her on the register and walked her to her car twice when the parking lot lights went out. Now Lena looked at Naomi as if asking what she was supposed to do. Naomi gave her the smallest shake of her head. "Stay safe. Do not step into this." Officer Ryan Miller stood beside the patrol car, his face half lit by the strobes. He looked younger than Cole by at least 15 years, with a clean uniform and uncertain eyes. His body camera blinked red against his chest. Naomi saw him glance at Avery, then at Cole, then down at the pavement. That glance told her he knew something was wrong. It also told her he had not yet decided whether knowing was enough. Cole reached for his radio and spoke in a clipped voice, saying Naomi was noncompliant, saying she was refusing a lawful instruction, saying he needed a unit to assist. Each phrase sounded official, polished smooth by repetition. Naomi listened carefully. Paralegal habits rose inside her like muscle memory. Exact time. Exact words. Witnesses. Cameras. Sequence. She had once built timelines for people who could not afford to forget. Now she built one silently for herself. 10:52. No warrant. No probable cause stated. Documents provided. Search refused verbally. Child present. Witness recording. Body camera active. Her pulse hammered in her throat, but her face stayed calm. Avery pressed her small palm to the inside of the window. Naomi looked at that hand and felt the whole world narrow to 5 little fingers against glass. She wanted Avery to remember more than the lights, more than the uniform, more than the fear. She wanted her to remember that her mother had stood in the cold and spoken clearly. Cole stepped closer again. "Last chance," he said. "Open it." Naomi lifted her chin, just enough to meet his eyes. "I do not consent to a search," she repeated. This time, her voice did not shake at all. Officer Travis Cole had spent 18 years learning how to make a sidewalk go quiet. He did not need to raise his voice much. He knew how to stand with his shoulders squared, how to pause before answering, how to let the badge speak before his mouth did. In this part of Southwest Atlanta, people knew his patrol car before they knew his name. Store owners lowered their voices when he walked in. Teenagers stopped laughing when he rolled past. Men on corners suddenly remembered places they needed to be. Cole called it respect. Others called it surviving the moment. He had built a career on that difference. His file said veteran officer, field training experience, commendations for enforcement activity, reliable under pressure. What the file did not say, not on the first page and not in the polished language sent to city officials, was that 7 complaints had followed him through 3 precincts like smoke under a closed door. A college student said Cole searched his backpack without cause. A nurse said he kept her on the curb for 40 minutes after she asked why she had been stopped. A delivery driver said Cole laughed when he asked for a supervisor. Every complaint ended the same way. Insufficient evidence. Officer acted within policy. No further action. Those words had protected Cole so often that they began to feel like armor. That night, under the humming pharmacy sign, he looked at Naomi Brooks and saw another person who needed to learn the rules as he understood them. Not the written rules. Not the constitutional ones she kept naming so carefully. His rules. The rules of who got to speak, who had to explain, who was allowed to be tired, and who was expected to prove innocence with a smile. Officer Ryan Miller knew those rules too, but he had not yet learned to live comfortably inside them. He was 27, still new enough to polish his boots before every shift, still young enough to believe that a body camera was there to protect the truth and not just the department. He had heard older officers call Cole old school, the way people softened words they did not want to examine. Miller had watched Cole talk kindly to a businessman in a luxury truck after a clear moving violation, then turn cold with a black teenager on a bicycle for cutting through a parking lot. Each time, Miller told himself he was still learning, still observing, still waiting for the right moment to speak. But the right moment never arrived dressed like courage. It arrived as a mother standing beside a silver Honda with her hands visible and her daughter staring through the window. Cole moved toward the rear of Naomi's car, shining his flashlight over the trunk seam as if the metal itself might confess. "You are making this harder than it has to be," he said. Naomi stayed near the driver's door, exactly where he had told her to stand. "I am following your instructions," she answered. "I am also not giving consent." The word consent seemed to irritate him more than refusal. He turned his head slightly toward Miller. "You hearing this?" Miller's mouth went dry. "Yes, sir." "She thinks this is a classroom." Naomi felt the insult brush past her, but she did not pick it up. She kept her eyes on the red blink of Miller's camera. She thought of all the people who had sat across from her at the law office years ago, trying to describe officers who sounded calm on paper and cruel in memory. She thought of how many cases had collapsed because no one recorded the first lie. Then Cole said, loud enough for the camera and the parking lot to hear, "For my safety, I am conducting a search." Naomi looked at him, and something inside her settled into place. Not fearlessness. Something steadier. "Officer Cole," she said, reading his nameplate, "you have not stated a lawful basis for that search." For the first time, his confidence flickered. It lasted less than a second, but Miller saw it. So did Naomi. The night held its breath around them. Naomi Brooks understood that there were moments when speaking too much could become a trap, and speaking too little could become surrender. She stood under the pharmacy lights with the wet asphalt reflecting every flash of red and blue, and she chose the narrow path between them. "Officer Cole," she said again, her voice steady enough to make the watching faces turn still, "I am not refusing to cooperate. I gave you every document required. I am refusing consent to a search without a lawful reason." The sentence did not sound loud, but it traveled. It reached Lena behind the pharmacy doors. It reached the man with the grocery bag holding his phone halfway between fear and responsibility. It reached Officer Ryan Miller, whose eyes moved quickly from Naomi's open hands to Cole's tense posture. Cole gave a short laugh, not because anything was funny, but because laughter was easier than admitting she had said it correctly. "You hear that, Miller? She has been watching videos." Naomi did not answer him. She looked toward the back seat, where Avery had pulled her knees close to her chest. The little girl's face was small and pale under the passing lights, her eyes shiny but focused on her mother. Naomi lifted 2 fingers gently near her side, their private sign for "count with me." Avery copied it against the glass. 1, 2, 3. Cole saw the motion and turned sharply. "Do not signal to anyone." Naomi lowered her hand at once. "I was calming my daughter. You are escalating this. Stop." The word escalating hung there like a label being prepared before the evidence existed. Naomi had heard that word before in interview rooms, in sworn statements, in reports that turned calm people into problems and questions into threats. She took one slow breath through her nose. I am standing where you told me to stand. Cole stepped closer, still careful enough to keep the scene clean, still aware enough to perform for cameras while pretending not to care about them. Here is what is going to happen, he said. You are going to open that trunk, I am going to make sure there is nothing I need to worry about, and then maybe you and your little girl can go home. The offer sounded almost reasonable if no one listened to the word maybe. Naomi listened. So did Miller. No, sir, Naomi said softly. The parking lot seemed to tighten around those two words. A car rolled slowly along the far lane, then stopped near the exit. Someone inside lowered a window. The pharmacy doors slid open a few inches and closed again. Breathing cold air into the night. Cole's jaw worked once. Say that again. Naomi's mouth had gone dry, but her eyes stayed clear. I do not consent to a search. Miller shifted his weight. The body camera on his chest continued blinking. He knew policy well enough to know Cole needed more than irritation. He knew training well enough to hear the difference between refusal and obstruction. But he also knew the weight of a senior officer's silence afterward, the kind that followed you into locker rooms, roll calls, and late-night shifts where backup mattered. Cole turned toward him. Miller, note that she is refusing a lawful order. Miller hesitated. The pause lasted only a heartbeat, but in a police report, in a lawsuit, in a life, a heartbeat could become a doorway. She is refusing consent, Miller said carefully. Cole stared at him. The words were not rebellion, not yet, but they were not obedience either. Naomi saw something pass between the two officers, something brittle and dangerous. Cole looked back at her with a colder expression than before. Put your hands behind your back. Avery made a small sound from inside the car. Naomi closed her eyes for half a second, not in defeat, but to gather every piece of herself before the night tried to scatter them. When she opened them, she looked directly at Miller's camera. For the record, she said, I have complied with all lawful instructions. I have not consented to a search. My child is present. I am asking that my sister, Danielle Brooks, be called to pick her up. Cole moved as if her words were nothing. But Miller heard them. The camera heard them. The stranger's phone heard them. And somewhere inside Naomi, beneath the fear, beneath the ache already rising in her wrists before any cuffs touched them, a quiet certainty took root. If they were going to turn her dignity into a charge, then the truth would need witnesses. Tonight, at least, the truth had more than one. Cole reached for the cuffs with the slow confidence of a man who believed the ending had already been written. Naomi did not step back. She did not raise her voice. She simply turned as instructed, facing the silver Honda, where Avery's small face hovered behind the window like a candle behind rain-streaked glass. The metal of the car felt cold through Naomi's uniform jacket as she placed her hands where Cole told her to place them. The cuffs closed around her wrists with a hard, final sound that seemed much louder than it should have been. Avery began to cry, not loudly at first, but in broken little breaths that made Naomi's chest ache more than the pressure around her wrists. Mommy, she called through the glass. Mommy, please. Naomi turned her head just enough to be heard, careful not to move too fast. Avery, look at me, she said, keeping her voice soft even as the lights flashed across her face. You did nothing wrong. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Remember. Avery pressed both palms to the window now, trying to be brave and failing in the way children fail when the world becomes too large. Cole opened the rear door of his patrol car. That is enough talking. Naomi looked toward Miller. Please call my sister. Danielle Brooks. Her number is in my phone under emergency contacts. Miller looked at Cole, then at Avery, then at the phone resting in the cup holder of Naomi's car. I can contact a family member, he said quietly. Cole's eyes cut toward him. Secure the scene first. The words landed like a wall. Miller froze again, caught between policy and obedience, between what he knew and what he feared. Naomi saw it, and for one painful second, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because her daughter was still crying in the car, and sympathy had limits when a child was being taught that adults in uniforms could ignore her tears. The man with the grocery bag had moved closer, still recording from a safe distance. "She did not do anything," he called out, his voice trembling but clear. Cole turned his head. "Step back." The man stepped back, but he did not lower the phone. Lena stood inside the pharmacy with another employee now, both of them watching through the glass doors. More headlights slowed along the street. The parking lot, once empty and ordinary, had become a circle of witnesses. Cole guided Naomi toward the patrol car without haste, careful. Controlled, professional enough for any distant camera to misunderstand him. But Naomi could hear what he said under his breath, low enough that he thought it belonged only to her. "People like you always learn too late." Naomi's breath caught, but she did not answer him. She looked down at the pavement instead, at the oil-dark puddles reflecting the lights, at the white parking lines, at the tiny purple hair bead that had fallen from Avery's braids earlier that afternoon and now lay near the front tire. That bead nearly broke her. Not the cuffs. Not the accusation. Not Cole's voice. The bead. A small bright thing from an ordinary day, sitting in the middle of a night that had turned cruel. When Cole placed her in the back of the patrol car, Naomi shifted carefully, keeping her eyes on Avery as long as the angle allowed. "Baby, listen to Miss Lena if she comes out," she called. "Call Aunt Danielle." Cole shut the door before she could say more. The glass between them made the world look warped. Avery's mouth moved, but Naomi could not hear the words over the muffled radio and the hum of the engine. Across the lot, Miller finally walked to Naomi's car. He opened the front door, picked up her phone, and glanced again at his body camera as if realizing it had been watching him watch everything. Cole returned to the driver's seat and began speaking into the radio, using clean words for an unclean thing. Subject detained. Refused lawful order. Possible obstruction. Naomi sat upright in the back, wrists behind her, shoulders aching, face still. She repeated the real timeline in her mind like prayer. Documents provided. No consent. No lawful basis stated. Child present. Witnesses recording. Body camera active. Then she looked through the partition at Cole's reflection in the rearview mirror. He would write his version before midnight. But for the first time that night, Naomi understood something he did not. His version was no longer alone. The holding room smelled like old metal, floor cleaner, and air that had been breathed too many times. Naomi Brooks sat on a narrow bench bolted to the wall, her wrists resting in her lap now, marked by the memory of the cuffs more than the cuffs themselves. A thin fluorescent light buzzed above her with a tired, uneven rhythm, turning every face pale and every shadow sharp. There was no window, only a square clock with black numbers and a second hand that moved with cruel patience. 11:46. She had been away from Avery for less than an hour, but the distance felt larger than the city. Someone had finally allowed her one phone call after Miller confirmed Danielle Brooks was on the way to the pharmacy. Danielle had answered on the second ring, breathless, already afraid. Naomi had kept her voice calm until she heard Avery crying in the background. Then her throat had closed for one dangerous second. "Tell her I am okay," Naomi had whispered. "Tell her to drink water. Tell her I saw her counting." After the call ended, the silence came down hard. Not peaceful silence. Not the kind that follows rain or prayer. This was the silence institutions use when they want a person to feel small. A desk officer had taken her shoelaces and her belt. Another had asked routine questions without looking at her face. Name. Address. Date of birth. Emergency contact. Each answer turned her life into boxes on a screen. No one asked what had happened. No one asked why a mother coming home from work had been brought in like a problem that needed storage. Naomi folded her hands and looked at the faint purple line around her left wrist. She remembered Avery at 6 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with crayons, drawing a house with flowers taller than people. She remembered Avery asking why some kids at school said her hair was too big, and Naomi telling her, because some people are taught to fear what they should admire. She had said it gently then, smoothing coconut oil through her daughter's braids. Tonight, the lesson had arrived without gentleness. Naomi leaned back against the cold wall and closed her eyes. The sounds around her came in pieces, a keyboard clicking beyond the door, a radio muttering codes, the squeak of shoes on wax tile, someone laughing too far down the hall. Her mind tried to replay the stop, but not like memory. Like evidence. Cole's first words. The time. The flashlight near the trunk. The exact phrase he used when he thought only she could hear him. People like you always learn too late. She opened her eyes. That sentence would not leave her. It sat inside her chest like a stone, heavy and undeniable. She wondered whether Miller's camera had caught it. She wondered whether the stranger's phone had caught her face when Avery cried. She wondered whether Lena would be brave enough to say what she saw if anyone asked. Then another thought came, quieter than the rest. What if nobody asked? That was the fear beneath all the others. Not jail. Not paperwork. Not court dates or fees. The deeper fear was that the world would move on by morning, that Cole would type clean words into a report, that Naomi would become another woman people half believed and half blamed. She had seen it happen. She had filed those stories in beige folders. She had watched truth become weak when it had no witness, watched pain become suspicious when it came from a black mouth. Her eyes burned, but she did not let the tears fall. Not because she was ashamed of crying, but because she knew if she started, she might not stop until Avery was in her arms again. Across from her, a young woman in a gray sweatshirt sat with her head bowed, tapping one sneaker against the floor. She looked up once, saw Naomi's wrist, then looked away with the tired recognition of someone who understood too much. No words passed between them. None were needed. The clock moved to 12:19. Naomi breathed in for 4, held for 4, breathed out for 4, the same rhythm she had given Avery through the glass. For the first time all night, her body softened just enough to feel the ache in her shoulders. She pictured her daughter safe in Danielle's car, wrapped in the emergency blanket Naomi kept in the trunk for cold mornings and flat tires. The trunk. The thing Cole had wanted so badly to open. Inside it were grocery bags, a broken umbrella, a case of bottled water, old legal textbooks she still could not bring herself to donate, and Avery's science fair poster about weather patterns. Nothing dangerous. Nothing hidden. Nothing worth the humiliation. And that was the point. It had never been about the trunk. It had been about whether Naomi Brooks was allowed to say no and still remain human. Somewhere beyond the door, a phone rang. Footsteps approached, slowed, then passed. Naomi kept her eyes on the clock. She did not know that Officer Ryan Miller was sitting alone in a report room 2 hallways away, watching the body camera footage with his hand over his mouth. She did not know that he had rewound Cole's words 3 times. She did not know that truth, small and red and blinking, had followed her into the dark. Officer Ryan Miller watched the footage again after midnight, alone in a small report room that smelled of burnt coffee and printer toner. The glow from the monitor turned his uniform blue-gray, and the rest of the room seemed to shrink around him. On the screen, Naomi Brooks stood beside her silver Honda with her hands visible, her voice steady, her daughter watching from the back seat. Miller heard himself breathe through the microphone. He heard Cole say she was making it harder than it had to be. He heard Naomi say she did not consent. Then came the sentence that made Miller stop moving entirely. People like you always learn too late. He rewound it. Played it again. Rewound it once more. The words were not loud, but they were clear enough to cut through every excuse that had been forming in his head. Miller leaned back in the chair and rubbed both hands over his face. For months, he had told himself that Cole was rough, not corrupt. Impatient, not cruel. Old school, not dangerous. Those softer words had let Miller sleep. Now they sounded like lies borrowed from men who needed silence to keep their careers clean. At 1:28 in the morning, Cole submitted his report. Miller saw the draft in the shared system before it was finalized. Subject became argumentative. Subject refused a lawful order. Subject created safety concerns. No mention of Avery. No mention of the request to call Danielle. No mention of Naomi's calm voice, the witnesses, the cameras, or the fact that Cole had never stated a legal basis for the search. The report was neat. That was what disturbed Miller most. It did not look angry. It looked official. He sat there staring at the words until they began to feel heavier than the footage itself. At 2:12, Miller copied the body camera file to the evidence archive as required. Then he did something that made his pulse thud in his ears. He wrote down the file identification number on a yellow sticky note, folded it twice, and put it in his wallet. He did not know yet whether that was courage or fear trying to become useful. Across town, Naomi was released just after dawn with no explanation that sounded like an apology. Danielle was waiting outside the precinct in a gray sweatshirt, Avery asleep against her shoulder, wrapped in the emergency blanket from the trunk Cole had never opened. Naomi stopped on the steps when she saw them. Her face held together for 1 second, then another, and then Avery woke, saw her mother, and ran. Naomi knelt carefully and pulled her daughter close, breathing in the smell of chocolate milk, rain, and little girl shampoo. "I counted," Avery whispered into her coat. "I know, baby," Naomi said. "I saw you." Danielle looked over Naomi's head toward the precinct doors, her eyes bright with anger she was trying to keep quiet. "We are calling someone," she said. Naomi nodded, but her gaze had drifted to the street beyond them, where morning traffic moved as if nothing had happened. Buses sighed at corners. Office workers balanced coffee cups. The city kept going, indifferent and loud. That was what frightened her most. By 8:30, a short video from the men with the grocery bag appeared online. It was shaky, distant, and incomplete, but it showed enough. Naomi standing still. Cole demanding the trunk. Avery crying behind the glass. By noon, the clip had thousands of views. By 3 o'clock, local reporters were calling the pharmacy. By 5, the department released a statement saying the matter was under review. The words sounded familiar to Naomi. Under review often meant buried under paper until people got tired. But that evening, as she sat at her kitchen table with an ice pack wrapped in a dish towel and Avery coloring quietly beside her, an email arrived from an address she did not recognize. The subject line: "Read, you need the full video." Naomi opened it with her heart beating hard. There was no message, only a secure file link and one sentence beneath it. "I should have spoken sooner." The video loaded slowly. Then the parking lot appeared, sharp and close, from Miller's body camera. Cole's voice filled the kitchen. Naomi's own words followed. Then the sentence: "People like you always learn too late." Danielle covered her mouth. Naomi did not move. Avery stopped coloring. For a long moment, the only sound was the refrigerator humming against the wall. Naomi stared at the screen, not because she wanted to relive the night, but because the night was finally speaking back. Marcus Reed watched the body camera footage in silence, both elbows on his desk, his reading glasses lowered to the tip of his nose. His office sat on the 4th floor of a narrow brick building downtown, squeezed between a bail bonds office and a tax service, but the walls were lined with framed cases that had changed lives in rooms much larger than his. Naomi sat across from him with Danielle on one side and Avery on the other, the little girl's sneakers swinging above the carpet because her feet did not reach the floor. The video ended, and the room held still. Marcus did not speak right away. He looked at Naomi's wrists, then at Avery's hands folded tightly in her lap, then back at the frozen image on the screen, Officer Cole standing beside the Honda, his face lit red and blue. "This was not a misunderstanding," Marcus said at last. His voice was quiet, and somehow that made it heavier. "This was a violation with a badge on it." Naomi looked down at the tissue twisted between her fingers. "I do not want this to become just another news clip," she said. "I want my daughter to know the truth has weight." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we make it heavy." Over the next 3 weeks, the case became more than one night in a pharmacy parking lot. Marcus filed public records requests. He subpoenaed dispatch logs, radio traffic, prior complaints, personnel notes, and every traffic stop involving Officer Cole over the past 5 years. At first, the city responded with polished delays. Processing request. Reviewing materials. Protecting privacy. Marcus had seen those phrases before. They were velvet ropes placed in front of locked doors. But Naomi knew how paper moved, and she knew where paper hid. She sat at Marcus's conference table after work, still in her pharmacy shoes, sorting timelines with yellow sticky notes and a tired precision that made the young associate stare. Look at these dates, she said one evening, tapping 3 complaint summaries. Same language. Same reason for the stop. Same claim that the person became argumentative after refusing a search. Marcus leaned over her shoulder, then went still. How many? Naomi counted again. 14 complaints. 9 black drivers. No discipline. The room changed after that. It was no longer only Naomi's case. It was a pattern with names, addresses, and signatures. One complaint belonged to a nurse who had been stopped after leaving Grady Memorial Hospital. Another belonged to a college student pulled over 2 blocks from campus. Another came from a retired Army mechanic who had written in careful block letters that he felt treated like a suspect in his own neighborhood. Each file had been closed. Each person had been told there was not enough proof. Now proof had a voice. At the preliminary hearing, the courtroom filled before 9 in the morning. Reporters lined the back row. Community pastors sat beside students. Lena from the pharmacy came wearing her work badge, hands clasped tightly around a paper cup of coffee. The men with the grocery bag sat near the aisle, looking nervous but determined. Officer Miller entered last, his face pale, his uniform pressed, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Cole sat at the city's table in a dark suit, no badge visible, but the same cold stiffness in his shoulders. When the city attorney described Naomi as uncooperative, Marcus stood without hurry. Your Honor, he said, we would like to play the full recording. The screen lowered with a soft mechanical hum. Naomi felt Avery's hand slip into hers. The courtroom watched the night unfold, not through rumors, not through a report, but through the camera Cole had trusted to protect him. Naomi's calm voice. Avery crying. Miller's hesitation. Cole's words. People like you always learn too late. A sound moved through the courtroom, not loud enough to be called a gasp, but deep enough to feel like the air itself had reacted. Cole looked down. Miller closed his eyes. Judge Eleanor Whitman removed her glasses and set them on the bench. Play that last portion again, she said. Marcus did. This time, no one moved. By the end of the month, the city agreed to a $6.7 million settlement, but Naomi refused to let the number be the only headline. The agreement required release of the complaint history, independent review of unlawful search allegations, revised traffic stop training, and a public apology read on record. When it was over, Marcus asked Naomi how she felt. She looked through the courthouse windows at the bright noon light on the steps outside. Not healed, she said. But heard. Then she turned to Avery, squeezed her hand, and walked out beneath cameras that no longer frightened her. Weeks later, the pharmacy parking lot looked smaller than Naomi remembered. The same automatic doors opened and closed with their soft mechanical sigh. The same yellow curb wrapped around the front entrance. The same security camera watched from above the sign, its dark glass eye reflecting a bright Atlanta afternoon instead of flashing patrol lights. Naomi stood beside her silver Honda with Avery's hand tucked inside hers, feeling the sun warm the sleeves of her coat. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Cars moved in and out. A woman carried a bag of diapers under one arm. A man laughed into his phone near the cart return. Ordinary life had returned to the place where Naomi's ordinary life had once been interrupted. That was the strange thing about pain. The world did not keep a mark on the pavement for you. It did not rope off the space where your child cried. It simply kept moving, and somehow you had to decide whether you would move with it or let that moment become the border of your life. Avery looked up at her mother. Are you scared to come back here? Naomi watched a paper receipt tumble across the asphalt, catching briefly against a parking block before the wind. Lifted it again. She thought about saying no, because mothers often want to become stronger than truth for their children. Instead, she squeezed Avery's hand. A little, she said. But being brave does not mean nothing hurts. It means the hurt does not get to drive. Avery nodded as if she understood part of it now and would understand the rest when she was older. Across the lot, Lena stepped out of the pharmacy doors wearing her blue work vest. She did not rush over. She simply raised one hand. Naomi raised hers back. That was enough. Some apologies had been spoken in court. Some reforms had been signed into policy. Officer Travis Cole was no longer with the department, and the old complaint files were no longer hidden in quiet drawers. Officer Ryan Miller had testified under oath, his voice shaking at first, then growing steadier as he admitted what he saw and what he should have done sooner. The settlement money had changed Naomi's bills, but it had not changed her purpose. She paid off her mother's medical debt. She opened a college fund for Avery. Then, with Marcus Reed's help, she started a small legal access fund for families who had stories but no lawyer, fear but no footage, pain but no paperwork strong enough to be believed. The first office was only 700 square feet, above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon every morning. Naomi put 3 things on the wall: Avery's science fair ribbon, a framed copy of the public apology, and a handwritten note from Mr. Harlan, the attorney who had once taught her that rights did not disappear because someone said cooperate. People came quietly at first. A bus driver. A nursing assistant. A retired mechanic. A teenager with his mother. Naomi listened to each of them the way she had once wished the world would listen to her, without rushing, without doubting the wound just because it was spoken softly. Months later, Avery asked if the night in the parking lot had made them rich. Naomi smiled sadly and brushed a loose braid from her daughter's cheek. "No, baby," she said. It made them answer. That answer stayed with Avery. Years from now, she would remember less about the money than the way her mother stood in sunlight afterward without becoming hard. She would remember that Naomi did not teach her to hate every badge, or fear every stranger, or confuse bitterness with justice. She taught her something harder, that kindness is not weakness, that dignity can stand even when power tries to rename it, and that saying no to what is wrong can become the first word of freedom. Before they left the parking lot, Naomi walked to the spot where she had once stood beside the car, hands visible, voice calm, heart breaking where her daughter could not see. She looked down at the clean white line beneath her shoes. No marker. No plaque. No crowd. Just sunlight, asphalt, and breath. Avery slid her small hand into Naomi's again. This time, they walked away together by choice. And if you had been standing there that night, watching a mother stay calm while the world tried to make her small, what would you have done? Stayed silent, recorded the truth, or found the courage to speak?